Welcome to this, the season finale of The Agent's Angle, and an episode that, much like the suspension of various parts of the new FIFA football agent regulations, was never originally scheduled or planned for. With me, Jonathan Booker.
And me, Peter Paleologos. So with our season drawing to a close here on The Agent's Angle, we're going to have some reflection back on 42 episodes of the show. And more importantly, look forward to the challenges and opportunities that may lie ahead for the football agents industry.
And of course, we bring what many have no doubt been waiting for, the second instalment of the interview with a former FIFA official. This time covering aspects such as the agent's exam, licensing, and of course the FFAR.
All that to come on this episode of The Agent's Angle.
So here we go, last Agent's Angle of the season. But hopefully 1 year on, 1 season on, and 42 episodes later, we've improved a little in delivering a worthwhile podcast to all of you listening. We have covered a lot of content this season, and somewhat understandably, those 4 letters, FFAR, the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, have featured on many episodes this season, and we've witnessed a lot of developments in that respect. And it will probably come as no surprise that the FFAR will be mentioned maybe once or twice today as well. We still await overall clarity on FFAR and many other key issues affecting the agents industry. And no doubt any second season of the Agent's Angle will hopefully feature some clarity on such things as the FFAR.
Yes, Jonathan, we've covered, I would say, a plethora of issues. In fact, we've also had a huge lineup of very interesting guests. I think we underestimate sometimes what the agent industry is about and how many stories are out there. We've been seeing different aspects and dynamics of the agent industry from different countries. And one of the interesting parts of this podcast, at least for me, is being able to research topics and cross-reference information so we can get that information right for our podcast. We always like to do our research or cross-check information that we do publish or talk about here. And let's hope going forward, the transfer window is one that really goes well for agents because there's a lot of new agents in this space. But also, after the transfer window, we get some clarity on some of the big issues. You mentioned FFAR, on caps, on the agents tribunal, and of course on compliance requirements and everything else going forward. So a lot of big issues down the track and in the future, Jonathan.
But over the course of this first season of the Agent's Angle, a little over a year, as I mentioned, we have featured a lot of articles and topics, not just FFAR. But we've also dropped a lot more articles and topics, which we would have liked to have covered had we had the time to do so. In fact, my spreadsheet of shortlisted articles and those used for the show this season alone exceeds well over 500 such features, plus a plethora of agent-related topics. And no doubt Peter has additions for both of those lists as well. And there was me thinking back when we started the show that we would see content relating to the football agents world dry up after just a few episodes. Beyond that is transfer speculation, media sensationalism, and also the self-promotion by some agents.
There's always going to be informative content in the agents world. I've always been confident of that. I actually was listening to another podcast on football the other day. Yes, me and Jonathan do listen to other football podcasts, some very interesting podcasts out there. And the host and the guest were talking about a club transfer request about an important player. And that part of that, they had to satisfy the agent's requirement. They mentioned that 3 times, that the agent was centerpiece of the deal. They had to get sign off from that for the club to proceed. So I'm not surprised. There's a lot of content and a lot of stories. But to follow up from last week's show, and probably what most people are waiting for this episode, we are now going to bring you the second installment of the interview, giving an insight into a rather bumpy road experienced by those FIFA staff dealing with the development and implementation of the FFAR, FIFA Football Agent Regulation, in recent years. As you may recall, our interview features Tarik Ajanovic as our guest, who until recently was a senior legal counsel at FIFA, mainly working within the agents department, where his role included working on projects such as the FIFA Football's exam, the FIFA Football Agents Regulation implementation, and the FIFA Football Agents platform. And thus, in this second part of the interview, I started off by asking Tarik about the infrastructure and systems in place to support licensed agents, the FIFA agent department, and many others who are affected by the FIFA agent space. Now, I want to focus on the infrastructure and the related entities that were developed in order to set up the worldwide FFAR ecosystem, I like to call it. Was it just solely the agents platform? Obviously, you had the legal platform, which will deal with the agents chamber as it was going to be implemented, the agents tribunal, and also the clearinghouse. What else was there in terms of preparing an infrastructure to support the implementation of the FFAR worldwide?
Well, those are definitely projects that FIFA has been working on for several years now. Would maybe separate the FIFA Clearinghouse from the Agents project because it is a separate project which started even before the FIFA Agents or FIFA Intermediary Department was founded. So that is definitely something which the FFAR intends to use as a vehicle in the coming years, obviously in the context of what the FFAR at the moment. So I would separate maybe the clearinghouse. I think, to be honest, the clearinghouse wasn't something that was very much considered in the context of the FFAR IR department because we always knew that the clearinghouse has its own path, so to say, that they needed to develop their own systems. And then eventually, when FIFA decides to take that next step, to kind of plug into the finished product there. So our colleagues at FIFA Clearinghouse were not necessarily involved that much in the agents project. We obviously consulted them, want to receive their inputs to see what could be the next step. So in terms of these other projects, as you mentioned, the FIFA agent platform and the FIFA football agent exam, and obviously the FIFA legal platform. Yes, as you correctly said, the FIFA legal portal is something that was already there. Obviously, as with any technical solutions, there are certain things which can definitely be better, and I hope that they will be fixed soon. The same goes for the FIFA agent platform as well. But in the same sense, since I was involved in the creation of the FIFA agent platform from scratch, we more or less drafted the infrastructure around it on how it is actually supposed to look like and what is it supposed to do. So our original idea was to streamline everything to be available in the official FIFA languages. The regulations are published in so English, French, and Spanish. To make it available worldwide, to obviously have enough security checks so we actually know that the person that is applying is a real person, so at least we have some sense that the person actually exists, obviously respecting the relevant laws regarding privacy and data protection. We also wanted to centralize both the exam process, the licensing process, and in the future, the license management and reporting process in one place. Throughout the consultation period and throughout the drafting period of the FFAR, there were different proposals from various sides. Even today, some agents think that even international transfers or international transactions should be reported to national associations because somehow they probably understand the context better. We were of the position that FIFA should have access to that information in order to actually understand the impact of the regulation. So if in X years of time it actually sees that there are certain inefficiencies in the market, that it can actually re-regulate certain aspects of the FFAR and the agent industry to fix those inefficiencies. But obviously, that, as you are well aware right now, the reporting requirement is currently suspended. So in that regard, the agent platform, the directory connected to it, I've already mentioned that our original idea was to publish much more information than is available now, because at the time we had been following the reactions from the associations as well. So I remember a very specific situation in one communication from one association where they told us that they have a very small agent market. And within that small agent market, only a handful of those agents are involved in women's football, and none of the agents from women's football passed the exam. So female players and clubs in the women's football sphere struggled really hard to identify who is from their territory and can actually help with transfers in women's football. So I think some of the additional information I've told you, maybe disclosing residency or filtering by residency, could be useful in the future. So we'll see what happens there. The exam was something which we wanted to be very careful with. I know that it is a controversial topic for many, especially those that haven't been able to pass the exam. But from the outset, our idea was to create a very, very clean, efficient, and transparent system to show basically to all candidates beforehand how it is going to look like, what are going to be the final results, how is it going to work, what they will expect. So in that sense, I think it was, once again, a very challenging process because the development of the agent platform, we obviously had to plug into existing FIFA systems, some of which were quite obsolete, so they needed to be updated. So in that sense, that was a challenge as well. So there's definitely going to be a lot of work for FIFA to kind of bring everything together to work. And finally, as I've said, the exam itself was a separate project, something I think was my primary responsibility during my last year at FIFA, something which I'm proud of, but at the same time, I'm aware that there are certain inefficiencies which could be improved. Because when we started the project, you always hear bad news first. So when we were actually collecting feedback from the associations, from their previous experience in dealing with these player agent exams prior to 2015, we were faced with feedback that was just talking about cheating and negative experiences. So we were already preparing for that. What FIFA can do, what associations can do to prevent cheating, to allow fair exam conditions to anyone around the world. So it was very difficult to standardize certain rules around the world. You have to realize that FIFA has to deal with certain associations where the level of IT technology in that particular part of the world is not necessarily as developed as in Europe. So whichever solution we implement for England, Germany, and Norway, for example, it has to work for Fiji, Togo, and Kosovo. So in a sense, we needed to find a solution which is acceptable to all. So there are definitely certain things which can be added to the platform to make it even more efficient, but then maybe it wouldn't be as effective, or maybe it wouldn't even work in certain parts of the world where the bandwidths are quite slow, where the level of IT infrastructure is simply not good enough. So we'll see what happens next. I see that FIFA has been investing a lot in supporting the agent platform, developing it further. I'm happy to see that there are definitely things in the pipeline to be released soon. So I'm just looking forward to see what are those next steps. Yeah.
Yes, several agents a bit find the agents platform can be difficult, sometimes down, and obviously the directory has been down for a while. So yeah.
I'm a bit surprised by that as well, to be honest.
Yeah.
I always told everyone to check the directory, so hopefully it goes back very, very soon. I hope it's not another legal challenge, so we'll see what happens next.
You mentioned the exam, and we know there's a lot of rumor, myth, interest in the exam procedure, and we've discussed the exam on the agent's angle, and our listeners are very interested in what exactly is happening with the exam. I'm going to give you some short questions for the exam itself, just to provide some clarity. I'll go with the first one. How big is the pool of questions for the FIFA agents exam?
So every edition of the exam, so far we've had 3. Every edition of the exam has a unique question bank, which is several hundred questions long. So for the most part, the vast majority of those questions are drafted from scratch. Some of the questions are, let's say, recycled, but simply because of the fact that we are limited in the sense that there's only a certain amount of questions that you can produce, for example, for the FIFA football agent regulations, which has not many articles. And then obviously when you subtract for the last exam, those articles which are currently suspended, then you only have a handful of articles and parts of those regulations they can work with. So yes, some questions are then rephrased. I always say when I'm asked this question that those that are preparing for the exam should not study and prepare using the old questions for several reasons. For example, I'll use the example of RSTP, which changes quite often. So the RSTP, which had been enforced for the April 2023 exam, is not the same RSTP which had been enforced for the May 2024 exam. So in that sense, if somebody is preparing for one of the upcoming exams soon by studying the old questions, they might be studying concepts and regulations which are no longer enforced, and which are, if not correct, then at least will not be in the exam. In the same sense, FIFA has also recognized its own mistakes in some of those questions and has fixed them. So very often I've seen agents studying certain questions where FIFA has already corrected it and informed those that were affected by those questions. So just to give you basically the background of how it works. So my task was to coordinate our department and other departments in drafting those questions. The question bank obviously always relies on in-house expertise on those matters. So the agents department will reach out, for example, to our colleagues at safeguarding for their expertise and their questions for safeguarding. Same goes for player status on their expertise in RSTP. We'll do our questions for FFAR and so on. So once those questions are in, obviously then the agents department goes through them, standardizes them, create a unique balanced approach to all of them. So it has an equal amount of questions, which are single choice and multiple choice questions. Then at the same time, it checks them for credibility as well. Then those questions are proofread by native English speakers, people within FIFA that are very knowledgeable about FIFA regulations. So whenever somebody is challenging the language or certain provisions within FIFA or even questions, I find it quite strange because we had put in a lot of effort to actually remove those doubts because we had a dedicated team for that. Then the same thing is translated to Spanish and French by native speakers, people that are experts at their job. They're once again very knowledgeable about FIFA regulations. And then the final versions are once again checked by experts, i.e. lawyers from those departments that are also native speakers. So a senior legal counsel, for example, from the player status department that is native in Spanish will check the Spanish version of the RSTP questions and probably will look into other questions as well. I know that FIFA is doing a lot to actually implement that. I know there have been quite a few requests for FIFA to offer the exam in other languages. FIFA's approach in this regard is to follow the languages in which the regulations are published. So yes, although Arabic, Russian, and Portuguese and German are also official FIFA languages, regulations are not published in those languages. So at the moment, as far as I'm aware, FIFA is still of the position that it will only offer the exam in English, French, and Spanish because the regulations are published in those languages. But if there is an association which wants to have an exam in Bosnian, for example, the only thing that association needs to do is join forces with FIFA to actually translate those regulations. And by regulations, I mean the study materials to provide the expertise and to provide assistance. And I don't really think there's any pushback from FIFA not to do so. If FIFA said, yes, we will do it in every language, there are many more languages than 211 associations. So in my opinion, it's something which is not realistic. So speaking of the question bank, it will remain, I think, a question bank in English, French, and Spanish of several hundred questions, which is always drafted from scratch for the vast majority of the questions, I'd say 90 to 95%. And the 5%, which is just linked to certain provisions which are fixed, is just reworded. So very, very rarely I can remember even a single situation where a question was just replicated from one exam to another.
Thank you for that insightful analysis. I mean, there's a lot of things there we weren't aware. We hear a lot of speculation, but in terms of weighting the questions generated for each candidate in the exam, for example, the FFAR, is it like they may get 50% FFAR, 20% RSTP, 10% safeguarding, and also a mix of single answer questions or all that apply questions? Is that an algorithm issue or is it intended that everyone gets a fair mix of, I think there's 7 different themes or papers in the whole 700 pages, the statutes and the RSTP and the FFAR. Is there a fairness in that process of what candidates get for each exam in their 20 questions?
Yes, there is an algorithm which generates individual exams for each candidate the moment they actually start the exam. So there's a question bank of several hundred questions, and obviously that particular question bank is then internally divided into, let's say, certain buckets. So the FFAR questions, the RSTP questions, the FIFA statutes questions, the FIFA code of ethics questions, and so on. And obviously that is then further separated into theoretical questions and case study questions. As far as I'm aware, at least while I had been a part of the project, there was an equal number of multiple choice questions and single choice questions. So the system basically generates an individual exam. Whenever somebody clicks on start exam, the system, more or less, the algorithm says to pull 5 theoretical questions from the FFAR bucket, add 2 case study questions from the FFAR bucket, then continue to 3 questions from RSTP, which are theoretical questions, add 1 case study question from RSTP, and so on and so on. So every single exam follows the same approach. So I think if somebody thinks that they got a more difficult exam than their colleague, it's purely subjective, because from the moment the questions are drafted, the intention of the FIFA General Secretariat as a whole is to make all questions equally easy or equally difficult, however you want to put it. And then it's just a matter of luck which particular question you get. But at the same time, every single person will get the same amount of theoretical questions and case study questions from one category wherever they take the exam. So in that regard, I think those criticisms that certain people are getting an easier exam, I think that's purely subjective, and it depends on the level of preparation, their background, and so on and so on. I know that there are certain initiatives or proposals to have a global exam with the same questions for everyone. But being from that part of the world, you probably understand that people in Australia and New Zealand and Japan, because the exam is global in different time zones, would have the hardest exam possible because they would be doing the exam first, and then people doing it in Brazil or Chile, which are doing it at the end of the day in Zurich, would then have, I don't know, 15 or how many hours to hear what are the 20 questions everybody else in Australia got. So I don't think something like that will happen. As far as I'm aware, it will always remain within the system where the system generates questions and equally spreads out across the regulations.
On the exam and the licensing procedure as a whole, have you seen any bad practices? You actually mentioned one that a lot of people just want to be able to prepare for the exam by looking at mock exams or previous exams. There's also courses that are offered in relation to exam training. If you could offer some advice, considering the courses, considering some bad practices that you've probably come across being at the coalface of the exam procedure, if you could offer any advice to candidates with regards to licensing the exam, what would it be?
Well, I'll try to summarize everything, but basically the first advice would be to please read the exam rules. I don't know why, but many candidates that actually take the exam never actually read the exam rules, which are intended for them to actually understand the process. I was quite surprised when, during my time at FIFA, many of those that failed the exam said, listen, but it is not fair because, for example, I have a medical condition which requires me to have special monitor or something, and FIFA is very, very discriminatory about this. You're not giving me an opportunity, and in the exam rules, we actually offer an opportunity to accommodate people with medical disabilities for some mistakes. In the same sense with the appeal to the exam results, which I've written extensively about, I think right now, for the first time, FIFA has now introduced a review system for the exam. So many candidates out there never even knew that they could challenge their exam results for a limited amount of time. So my first advice for any future exam would be to read the exam rules first, then to take the study materials and then read the instructions in the study materials. I think that study materials have 3 pages of instructions. That's really not a lot. So all the relevant information should be contained there and should lead all prospective candidates to have all the information necessary for their exam attempt. Further, I think once again that they shouldn't concentrate that much on the mock exams online provided by others, because we do not know who drafted those questions. Are they correct, or are they using some of the old questions? In the same sense, this practice exam, which is available online, I think the question bank is only a couple of dozen questions long. So basically, if you do the exam 2 or 3 times, you're more or less covered all the questions there. So the point of having a practice exam is just for people to understand the concept, where to click, how it will look like, to establish that their device is compatible, and to understand the tone of the questions, not to prepare themselves for the exam. So this is why very often we actually check the stat. We would see that people will be getting regularly 18, 19 out of 20, so 90, 95% correct answers, and then they go to the exam and they do 10%, meaning that they never prepared with the study material. I would also advise they are dealing with so many requests to take the exam in England. And I want to be super clear about this. There is absolutely no difference whatsoever in where somebody takes the exam and where that person is from. So you can be someone, with all due respect, from Japan, having a nice vacation in Jamaica. And if you know that you're going to be at Jamaica at the time you do the exam in Jamaica, you're going to have absolutely the same exam in the same languages as if you did it in Japan. Same thing for England. I simply do not understand why so many people from abroad travel to England to take the exam when they can probably do the exam in their own countries. So for those in the UK, I would advise you to consider taking the exam somewhere else if you are somebody who is bothered by the noise. People have various levels of tolerance. So I found it quite strange that you have 400 people in London, but 15 in Cardiff and 20 in Glasgow, for example. So why is it so different to take a train ride to somewhere else and just do it in a very quiet environment? Some people are concerned about the result. It's probably less expensive to fly. I'll use my own example here. For example, from Manchester to Sarajevo and spend the night in a hotel, have a nice lunch, do the exam in Sarajevo and fly back. It will probably set you back less than to travel to London, pay the exam fee, and be there with 400 people. So I simply do not understand it. To come back on your point on courses, I think courses can be useful, but they are of different standards. While I had been part of the agent department, I was very happy to see that some of those agents / lawyers / project managers reached out to FIFA for clarification on certain issues. And I think that's very good. I think FIFA has been doing a lot and should be doing a lot more to actually explain certain provisions of the regulations to provide certain clarity and context. And in essence, I'm not just talking about the FFAR, I'm talking about the RSTP, statutes, and so forth. So in that regard, I think it's very good to check with the person or the organization providing the particular course whether or not they have checked any of their source materials with FIFA, their understanding of that. Are they using these old questions? Once again, they might be using questions which are not relevant anymore. I had the pleasure of being a guest speaker in a number of these courses over the past few months. I saw that some of these courses actually use quite a lot of time to teach students about the suspended provisions. Well, I think it's good to actually understand them and know what is being challenged. And if the ECJ or any other court rejects at the end these challenges and we go back to square one, I think agents that are licensed at the time should know what is the current situation at the time. But I really don't think there's a need to spend hours and hours and hours on calculating the service fee cap and so on. So in that regard, there are different standards. There are various courses out there. I personally think, because obviously I come from a legal background, from a sports law background, that those that are dealing in that particular area of the industry of sports lawyers do not really need those courses. FIFA lawyers themselves hardly know these regulations by heart. And I think it's quite ridiculous to expect that of the agents as well. So this is why it's an open book exam. Every time I work, I consult the regulations. The challenge of the exam is to know where to look the answers. So if you're asked a particular question, if you do not know the answer by heart, you should at least know where to look for the answer, and that's the whole point. And to finalize, the negative things that I've seen comes down to the actual enforcement of the exams on a global level within the National Association. So obviously there are certain negative behaviors, so to say, which are allegations of cheating. But unfortunately, these allegations never get reported to FIFA. So I'm always quite surprised to hear or to see news articles, to read news article that says Association X had a big issue because there were widespread reports of cheating. And then none of the agents which are talking, or candidates that are talking about these particular issues and are saying, oh, it was very unfair, the person in front of me was using ChatGPT or WhatsApp or whatever, never actually did something about it to report it to FIFA. FIFA has certain tools at its disposal to track these particular behaviors, to stop them, to limit the exam, to lock down the exam even more. So I suppose eventually FIFA will have to take those steps even further to prevent this cheating. But at the end of the day, I always say, if you see something that is wrong, report it to the association and request the association to follow the exam rules. Because very often people are now reaching out to me and saying, listen, I'm having this particular problem with my association because when I went to take the exam, they didn't want to follow A, B, or C. And the best possible thing which can be done at that particular moment is to raise your hand and clearly refer to the exam rules and to the MA staff responsible there and say, listen, please, can you provide me an environment where I can do my exam in peace? And the worst thing that can happen is that these people face these issues, which are realistic issues and which need to be rectified. And then they go back home and write an email to FIFA. I mean, what can FIFA do if there's a noisy situations in South America in a particular room 7 hours after the exam? Nothing. So always act in the best interest of your own career and your own exam experience by considering the exam rules and what needs to be done there.
Thank you for those tips and those observations. I think they'll be very useful for people who prospectively want to take the exam, but also gives sort of a flavor how FIFA sees the exam and yourself in particular in terms of some bad habits and what's been happening with the exam. Last question, and really appreciate your time, Tarik. I know you're busy. The FFAR, FIFA's created probably a new industry by implementing the FFAR, a whole new trend of new offering by consultants in the football agent space. You've got mentoring, training, education, courses. It's a whole new industry, I would say, has cropped up, which we probably didn't have during the regulations of working with intermediaries. Would you agree with that proposition that a whole new football agent compliance or regulatory space has been created with the FFAR, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally?
Well, yes and no. I think the agent industry is shifting in the sense that the tasks of a football agent are not quite specified. So, within the definitions of the FFAR, you have football agent services and other services. So FIFA is limiting itself only to regulating the football agent services, which are the negotiations, the trials, the transfers, and so on. Everything else outside of that space, which is commercial deals, real estate deals, management of a particular portfolio or a particular athlete, which is usually considered as as part of an everyday job of a successful agent, so to say, is something which is not regulated by FIFA, and you do not need a license for that. So I think we may see two types of changes in the market. I think that these big agencies right now around the world, which are offering more or less like a 360-degree approach to their clients, will need to separate, obviously in the context of FFAR as they are right now. We don't know what will happen in the future. They might need to separate the services they are charging them for their relationships with the clubs and the negotiations and whatnot, and other types of services that they're doing for them. Coaching, nutrition, whatever else they provide. So I think there's going to be a separation on that level, simply for business reasons, to charge different amounts for different things, because I don't even think that was the intention by FIFA, but we always felt that at the time that certain parts of that profession need to be left out, because it's just not within FIFA to regulate if an agent helps a player to buy a new house or not. So in that regard, I'm also seeing agents that are out there getting the license simply to link certain clubs. But at the same time, I've also seen many digital / alternative solutions to recruitment. So there are a number of platforms that are trying to link players without agents with clubs that are searching for players. So like a digital transfer market, so to speak, where you match players and clubs. So in that regard, I think we just need to wait and see. It's definitely not the same situation as 20 years ago when we had the player agent system as it was. And now when we have the football agent system, the player agent system ended in 2015. Then obviously we had several years of the intermediary system with all of its good and bad sides. And then we have a completely new football agent system, which is not necessarily a continuation of the old player registration system, but in my opinion, is a completely new regulatory system with new rules, with new intentions to promote certain parameters of transparency and efficiency. So we'll definitely wait and see what happens next, because I think that we need to look into the future. Yes, we are all now preoccupied with what happens with the FFAR and its implementation. I once again hope that we will get the best possible solution for all those involved. Once again, I underline FFAR not an ideal piece of regulations. I worked on the FFAR. It is my work product, so to say, alongside with my colleagues, but I'm also self-critical of my own work as well. I know there are certain things that could have been done better. There are certain things I do not agree with, but there's definitely things which are good. So I hope in the coming months and years, we'll see the FFAR implemented. We'll see the agent space becoming more efficient, more transparent. We'll get more people licensed. The requirements will be higher for those that actually want to come into the industry, in a sense that they will actually understand what they're dealing with. FIFA will provide many more learning opportunities through CPD and other alternative courses. And at the same time, we'll see agents adapting to these new challenges, new emerging markets, new industries, and why not even the US influence on the agents department, perhaps they get some new ideas.
Thank you for those final observations. It's going to be a very interesting FFAR journey worldwide as a framework, and watch this space. Tarik, thank you for your time. Thank you for your informed insights and answers. We really appreciate you coming on to our show. It really means a lot to us because you're the first person from FIFA that's come onto the show. So really, it's a great opportunity for us to unpack some of the issues. Jonathan, I don't know if you've got anything to add right now.
No, nothing from me. It's great to have the insights and hear it from the other side, shall we say, and somebody who's experienced the whole process through the implementation and the vision that was behind FFAR. So thank you, Tarik. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much for having me once again. It was a pleasure. Once again, I hope that those listening to this podcast and hopefully working as football agents in the future or becoming football agents will consider FFAR as something which is not oriented against them. It was an idea that we worked on for several years to bring in something which we thought is positive. Obviously, they can always be better. We'll see what happens in the future, but for now, I think the best thing that we can all do is respect the regulations in their current form on the national levels as well, comply, and I think at the end, everybody will have a much better experience going forward.
Thank you so much, Tarik. As we said in last week's episode, that interview with Tarik was recorded several weeks ago. So any references to the likes of the FIFA Agents Working Group meeting dates may not be entirely up to date. I think we can thank him wholeheartedly here from the agent's angle for his time, his willingness to articulate the motivations that many at FIFA had to improve the agent's regulatory space. That's my biggest take from this interview. I will say this as the last point in relation to Tarik's interview. It's an international piece of regulation. That is not easy to implement across so many federations, let alone put together. And I think Tarik articulated why there were difficulties in several areas, Jonathan.
You'll be pleased to hear, Peter, that I haven't picked over the bones to quite the same level of detail as I did with part one of Tarik's interview. But there are some notable elements for me and also things that I think justify closer scrutiny. The first thing is that in both this second part of the interview and the first instalment last week, there were many comments about things that could have been done better with regards to FFAR, which I don't think we will disagree with in the slightest. And also, there being developments in the pipeline, which will be released soon by FIFA, such as enhancements to CPD, the continued professional development for agents, and the agent platform as a whole. Well, we're still waiting, not only for signs of improvements and enhancements, but even the resolution of many bugs that already exist in the various systems. And if we take FIFA's timelines for the development of FFAR in the past as any form of guide, these timelines were certainly unpredictable. And thus I don't really have much faith in the use of the term soon by FIFA when it comes to the interest of licensed agents. Plus, Tarik himself used the phrase in the coming years when referring to some of these enhancements. In a similar vein, the comments about the FIFA clearinghouse and that we should separate that somewhat from the agent-related matters and the FFAR was also, for me, somewhat baffling. As correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, from my recollection, matters such as agent commissions and the clearinghouse were used in numerous presentations by FIFA in the years preceding the release of FFAR. And just one final point on the clearinghouse, and I'll probably get shot down in flames by some for saying this without a full explanation. I personally think that the FIFA clearinghouse, if implemented correctly and pragmatically with agents and agent commissions, will benefit the majority of agents, if not even be a key selling point for FIFA to the agents. But as with much of the FFAR and agent regulations, FIFA have screwed it up so badly.
The FIFA Clearinghouse is an important platform for football transfers and maybe also agents going forward. I recall FIFA presenting, I've seen a paper, a live Go webinar in about October 2022 about the Clearinghouse. I think agents were going to be part of the phase 2. A system for me that matches the deals and transfers by a correlation with agents and having the monetary side or what's happening with the funds at the heart of it is always beneficial for everyone involved. And in particular, as you mentioned, Jonathan, agents. So hopefully we will see an improvement in implementation because it is something that will embellish and assist the agents industry.
Now, the agents platform and agents directory is something we've referred to on several occasions over an extended period of the agents angle. We've both experienced numerous bugs and glitches, as have many other people. And those are still very apparent today, over a year on from the introduction of FFAR and the various platforms. But what I think makes this worse is the lack of transparency and communication from FIFA on such matters, which leads to frustration from the agents and no doubt a raft of support tickets for FIFA to answer, which could easily be avoided. And Tarik mentioned his surprise at the agents register continuing to be down, and it is still down as we speak on the 16th of July 2024. So we're talking a matter of months here now. But he also made a comment with regards to the agents register being unavailable. And that was that he hoped it's not another legal challenge. And from a transparency and communication perspective, that was an interesting comment for me, given what has happened before. Firstly, we know the German agents were the first to disappear from the register, and that eventually transpired to be down to the German challenges, and FIFA then added a brief note on the platform to explain that. Then we had English and Scottish agents seemingly disappear from the register for a period of time without explanation. And this was conveniently around the time of the arbitration hearings in those territories over FFAR. But now the whole register is offline without explanation, as the claim of being under maintenance doesn't wash after weeks, if not months, on such an important element of this whole framework. If it is because of a legal challenge, tell people, not just the agents, but everyone else who is trying to identify who is licensed and who is not to mention the additional safeguarding issues it causes in the register being unavailable. Because even referring people to these questionable digital IDs, as is the note on the register now, those are meant to be used in tandem with the register itself. And I would say on that matter in general, whoever made the decision to just wholesale remove people from the register or take the register offline completely is so short-sighted, whether there is a legal challenge or not. And there are many other ways in which such an issue could be addressed.
I've got 2 points here, Jonathan. You highlight actually what's important about this register. And interestingly, 2 matters came to my attention. One, and I mentioned this last week, this Friday, we have our Australian Agents Conference. And someone asked me, how do we know? Because all we wanted to do was invite licensed agents. How do we know which Australian agents are licensed? Where can we check? I mean, other than checking the ID, you couldn't really. I mean, I'm all for maybe new agents or people interested to come to the conference, but some other people wanted only licensed agents. So how do you check that? The other thing was a colleague of mine came to me and said he has lost 2 players to someone and he believes this agent is not licensed. How does he check? Because if you check and you find someone's unlicensed, you can make a complaint. We've covered that in the podcast before. So for me, the register is the most urgent item that needs to be rectified here. And even going forward, I would like to see a connection with that register or directory, if I can call it that, to the Italian and French registers and who are the licensed agents there for transparency's sake. It's still concerning, as you mentioned, Tarik raised it and you've raised it. It's still concerning after such a long time. Why is it down?
The other thing that Tarik mentioned on a few occasions is that the original idea was for FIFA to be able to make more information available about agents on the platform, whether it be in declarations or the register itself. And whilst we know this was a key element in many of the legal challenges and objections by agents to FFAR, I don't think it was the register that was the target, and therefore I think that sort of presentation of the issue is a bit misleading. Firstly, the information problem via the agent register, such as home nation or country of domicile, for me is a false flag. Simply allow the agents to decide themselves what information is published about them. If you as an agent want your country of domicile on there, fine. If you don't, fine. It's your choice, and the same with other details such as CPD points, minors authorization, or even legacy status. But more importantly, and we have mentioned this before, we've heard it numerous times from FIFA, and I heard it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, at CAS. There seems to be a huge miscommunication, maybe it's deliberate, between what FIFA want to publish in regards to agents and what they are hearing that the majority of agents object to being published.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a tension between transparency and privacy. Agents, I would say, don't want their fees published, or when their term with a player, and it's obviously 2 years now, ends. This information can easily give competitors or other entities or persons some inside track or advantage. I am a fan of the agent listing to have the domicile, but I actually agree with your point, Jonathan, in this occasion. It should be an opt-in model. So when you pass the exam and you register or you're a legacy agent, you get an option to opt in on a couple of these compliance checks. So yes, I want you to tell the agent world or the player world or the club world or looking at this directory that I am based in China or I'm based in Namibia or Australia, and maybe some other aspects opt in. Of course, agents will never agree, and I know this is very strong in a lot of the litigation and very strong with the agent associations, how much agents are earning on deals. If it's not 99%, most agents will not agree to have that publicised, Jonathan.
All it takes is a little bit of thought, a little bit of consideration, planning, and proactive creative thinking. But on the subject of thinking, we'll go on to the matter of the exam. And I thought it was great to not only get some clarity on matters regarding the exam, but also an insight into the practicalities from a FIFA perspective. Now, I was astounded to hear from Tarik that each exam has a largely unique question bank of several hundred questions, and if true, all credit to FIFA for that. Not least, as it sounds from Tarik, the process that FIFA go through with developing the questions is rigorous, but arguably monotonous and resource intensive. So, with that in mind, the reports that we have heard that some of the AWG, the FIFA Agent Working Group, may be tasked in the future with writing questions for FIFA makes sense from FIFA's point of view. But there was something huge, in my view, that Tarik mentioned, which related to the question bank. And that was that FIFA had no objections to providing the FIFA Agents exam in different languages if national member associations requested it and assisted FIFA with the questions, which immediately prompted me to think that at least one major ruling against the FFAR may have been reversed in that situation.
I'm sure you're referring to Brazil and the Portuguese that I mentioned, no Portuguese language exam. I mean, that was one of the reasons the Brazilian court found. It wasn't the sole reason, but yes, it was highlighted as different courts found different reasons. But for me, Tarik really broke down the exam development. He really summarized it well. Because I've been hearing a lot of rumor mill about the exam, and I think really Tarik emphasized what the exam was about and what was makeup and the processes and its development from the first exam to the third one. So it was really well articulated for me. I like the idea that exams need to be in different languages. And he did mention that national associations need to get involved in this initiative. It shouldn't be just up to FIFA. Maybe also other football law groupings like the AIAF. I know they're involved in other engagement with FIFA on the transfer rules. But at least for me, FIFA should look at initially expanding the exam in the FIFA languages, especially Portuguese, to be first off the rank, and maybe then one Asian language like Japanese. I know we had an interview early in the podcast, I would say, about a lot of Japanese. They're just concerned that they had to take it in English. So we need to see some movement there in terms of the language availability for examinees.
And now to the not so much negatives, but things I noticed that again didn't seem to add up. And as I've said before, I have no reason to doubt Tarik's representation, as he could have received misinformation or miscommunication himself, or we and others in the agent world did. He spoke about the intention to weight questions fairly in terms of such things as topic area and question format, which I believe was his objective in developing the exam, and that for me is totally sensible. But we've heard off people directly and also many indirect reports that that hasn't been the case for some exam candidates. And some candidates are not only receiving an unfairly weighted exam in terms of, for example, a low proportion of agent regulation questions and a higher proportion of safeguarding questions, but even that some questions are being replicated for the same candidate in the same exam. So something seems to be amiss here and needs addressing. But seeing the various issues relating to FFAR and also some of the information from talking to Tarik, and in the past I worked in the IT and project management world, there seems to be huge IT issues behind the scenes at FIFA in terms of the agent-related resources, not just the exam, but also the CPD, the agent platform, and the agent register. Maybe this department also is overstretched and under-resourced, or maybe not briefed or project managed adequately.
And it's common when setting up a new platform, you have to invest a lot. You need big budgets, and those budgets are always extended. That's why maybe some organizations use the CRM or off-the-shelf products that could be adjusted and adopted for these type of platforms. But a lot of people pass the exam, and whether there are some difficulties in its implementation and with the questions, overall, it seems to have succeeded quite well, Jonathan.
In regards to the exam process and the preparation for the exam, I think Tarik's insights and advice there were hugely valuable, if not invaluable, to those who are looking to sit the exam in the future. Not least as he isn't trying to sell a course off the back of his advice. The importance of reading the exam rules and understanding the process, I think we would agree with 100%, as we've heard some really bewildering reports and stories, such as candidates turning up for a computer-based exam without a laptop. He obviously has experience of British trains and the prices, because it seems quite a good suggestion to combine your stressful agent exam with a long break to somewhere nice, rather than sit in a noisy room with hundreds of others and unreliable Wi-Fi. And maybe it is an idea for FIFA that they are more open and transparent with more exam data quite soon after these exams, so that candidates can judge which venues may be oversubscribed or which might suit them better, or possibly actually limit the number of candidates at member associations for any one sitting. The exam itself, I still have considerable reservations about, and those remain largely unchanged to what I fed back to FIFA more than 2 years ago. But on the matter of negative behaviours and matters such as cheating, I think FIFA should take more responsibility here than Tarik alluded to. Not so much for policing the candidates, but policing the associations who host the exam. It's all very well to say to candidates, FIFA can't do anything after the event, meaning the exam, and that candidates should raise any issues with the hosting association. One, that's a great distraction for an exam candidate to consider in ultimately a very stressful and time-limited environment. Two, are the member associations going to report it to FIFA? I would guess most wouldn't, or would misrepresent what would arguably be their own failings. And also, if it was reported to FIFA, when and how do they want it reported? As FIFA's responses thus far to inquiries and FFAR and agent matters via the platform has hardly been quick or decisive. And yes, I still accept the agents department is seemingly grossly under-resourced. And just one suggestion I made over the years of so-called consultation on FFAR with FIFA, for which I made hundreds of communications and suggestions, as I know many others fed back constructively as well, is that they consider FIFA invigilators at exam venues. Not necessarily FIFA staff, I appreciate the number issues there, but possibly representatives of agents associations, player associations, even clubs, as they all have a vested interest in the professional licensing of agents. I even volunteered to do this 2 years ago, even before there was information released on the first exam, but FIFA officials ignored the idea. And one final thing that I found quite astounding, Peter, and I don't know if you did as well. Tarik mentioned there was a suggestion of proposals or initiatives that the exam in future reverts back to the same exam questions for everyone. Well, I have one thing to say on that. Which total and utter clown suggested that?
I don't know, but yeah, I can't accept that. I agree the exam needs to be fair, but it has to be at a difficult level. It can't be one that's, going back to the last time round. But more concerning for me is that some associations saw the flouting of a few of the rules in terms of the exams, and I wasn't aware that you put your hand up to be an invigilator. That's interesting, and I agree with you. It doesn't have to be all FIFA officials or National Association officials. There are a lot of other people or entities that can be part of the exam process. But at the end of the day, all exams across the world must follow the same rule book. Consistency is the key to be fair to everyone. I like to see a bit of a mix here. I don't think just an exam on itself is enough for this profession. Maybe I'm a traditionalist. The CPD doesn't have business type subjects at the moment. It's more regulatory type subjects. And I think this is a space where agent associations can come in terms of business type subjects and maybe, the work experience, apprenticeship, whatever you want to call it. And we've mentioned this before. There's a lot of courses on how to be an agent after the exam. However, we know, and from my experience, and I believe it's from the same with your experience, that the biggest training ground is out there. Trying to make deals, lessons learned, dealing with clients, losing clients, the real world. But also, as I mentioned, agent associations need to be filling some of this gap about training and providing more assistance, more experience opportunities to the agents or the licensed agents or the upcoming agents who want to enter the industry. There's a role for them there. It can't all be done by FIFA. It can't all be done by national associations. There's a remit for them and maybe a bit of a challenge, but we need to see more of that in this agents world, Jonathan.
I think I said enough last week on agents associations, so you're not dragging me down that route once again. But on the topic of the interview with Tarik as a whole, I found it a fascinating insight and something for agents to bear in mind when they may be frustrated with the FFAR, with the agents platform, or just FIFA in general. Consider the person on the receiving end may just be doing their job in the way they are allowed to and possibly with limited resources. We obviously had Paolo Lombardi on the show as a guest back in episode 13, and he reflected on his time at FIFA and the old license and regulations and what was there before 2015. But Tarik now brings a new dimension to that from the FFAR era, and it allows us all to compare and contrast what happened in the past with agent regulations and what may be the road ahead from their views and experiences. I don't agree with everything that Tarik said, such as no constructive feedback and just hostile feedback from agents in the consultation over FFAR. The fact that only big agents provide a 360-degree service, when I know smaller operators do as well. The AWG being in a position to be heard, not just listened to by FIFA. And also the perception of the impact of the Miami move. But I said it before, and we'll say it again. We are hugely appreciative to Tarik for agreeing to come on the show and being so generous with his time, and also being so open with us. All in all, a fantastic interview to finish the season on, and also tie off various loose ends in getting a FIFA perspective on agent matters and, of course, the FFAR.
Yeah, the interview was a landmark, groundbreaking interview for me in the agent space, as he answered many of the questions and, more importantly, gave us an indication of what lens FIFA saw the agent space, why things happened, and what challenges were faced by FIFA. Some things we probably didn't know in-house, how difficult it was. And it gave me some understanding and appreciation of why it was a difficult project to implement and what maybe lies ahead.
With that in mind and the road ahead, I thought it interesting for this last segment of the show, Peter, that we not just reflect on what's gone before in this season of the Agents Angle, but we also look ahead. And I'm curious as to what your predictions are as a lawyer, an agent, an officer of a National Agents Association, and also someone involved in governance and compliance elsewhere. And this is a question we pose to Tarik. How do you see the FFAR and the worldwide regulatory framework for football agents going forward?
I was hoping that you weren't going to ask me this question. I was actually hoping the third FIFA Agents Working Group outcomes will shed some limelight on this question, because I think after 3 meetings, we should have some concrete answers. So for me, the key matters, let's take the legal perspective, is, and we've harped on this a long time, the European Court of Justice cases. But not just the agents case that was referred to from Germany, and it will have an impact on what happened in Spain and other EU courts or markets, but also another case, which I think you'll mention a bit later, being the Diarra case, the transfer or the player contract case. These 2 cases are going to have a big impact. I think the industry itself will keep changing, reshaping, because a lot of new agents are trying to find their mark, whilst the big agencies are consolidating with a lot more investment. What I think, while we wait for these couple of European Court of Justice decisions and the shaping of the market, is some sort of more involvement by the national federations to step up and ensure the system is working. Part of the system's obviously only in place. There are a lot of articles of the FFA suspended. But also, with all these gaps, the challenge is also for the agents associations. Are they going to develop systems to fill any gaps? That's also the big question. So going forward, at least in the next year, court cases, opportunities for other stakeholders to step in, and also a reshaping of the market, Jonathan.
You're definitely trying to poke me with a stick on the agents associations, aren't you? I'm not biting. But overall, with regards to the agents world and the regulatory framework and all of that, I think it's still very unpredictable as to what may happen. And I actually have a presentation to make at a law conference in November on the topic of FFAR. And my normal approach of preparing well in advance for such presentations, in this case, it will probably be left until quite late on, because we don't know what's going to happen with FFAR in the next 3 or 4 months and beyond. Not least, my original prediction was that we may see an ECJ ruling on FFAR around about November time when I'm doing this presentation. Plus, that may all be thrown into further chaos before then when it comes to FIFA and football agent-related matters. As you mentioned, the Diarra case, and I think that could have bigger repercussions than the FFAR cases.
Yeah, that could be an earthquake in terms of the player contracting system, the transfer system, and that would have big implications for players, clubs, FIFA, UEFA, all the confederations, leagues, and the agents, because we're part of that infrastructure architecture. But what I do see is also, and we've seen a little bit this happening, and we've discussed it in the last episodes, that non-FIFA regulators like tax officers, other type of regulators, we saw one in the last episode in England coming in terms of human resource type companies, and even money laundering regulators growing in the space. I think some other actors, if I can call them that, will move into the space in the regulatory side and will have an impact on player contracts vis-a-vis player agents.
And soon as one question has thrown you into a bit of a spin, here's another one for you, just to finish. And we've posed this question to many guests on the show. But again, looking ahead, what is your one wish for the football agents industry going forward at this time?
One wish. Okay. I've talked about previously, I would like to see more collaboration, more transparency, and even better, public relations for agents, more unity. But my wish is something that's a little bit left field because a lot of our guests have given us a wish. I would like to see more literature on the agent's business. We don't tell our stories enough. More memoirs, more biographies, more research studies, more tomes on the history of agents. Even an agent's magazine, specific agent's magazine or something. People don't know our stories. People don't know our remit, our involvement, especially the good agents, the ones that really carved out a career and really help players. So something left field, Jonathan, the literature in this space, we need more of it. I know there's a couple of books out there, but really there's so many stories, so many compelling stories, memoirs and super agents, but even some of the small agents. I would like to see more of that out in the market so people can understand the business and the storytelling. What about you, Jonathan? Same question.
I'm probably going to cheat a bit here. And I'm going to do what I call now a Raffaella with my answer. And I have two, if not three answers to that. Firstly, one that's remained unchanged for me for many years now, and that is to see the football agent world evolve from merely an industry into that of a recognised profession. And a part of that is seeing the agents' associations become more effective and representative, and ultimately see agents secure recognised and official stakeholder status as a collective with other football bodies, including FIFA. Secondly, I think we need to see an adequate settlement over what is FFAR. We can't realistically put the genie back in the bottle now. It will have a detrimental effect on far too many people if we look to do that. The various elements, groups, and factions need to find that common ground. And to use a mediation term, they need to establish their needs rather than their wants to reach a productive settlement. And finally, leading on from the mediation thing, and from largely a totally selfish perspective, I'd really love to see agents and other football participants, such as players, clubs, managers, embrace and use mediation in the disputes they have with one another. We've seen the agents' chamber suspended, that's one thing. And with regards to mediation, I don't mean FIFA's model of mediation, which to me and many others is not really mediation in the first place.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, mediation is vast. And in an industry like football and agency, you need fast outcomes or fast resolutions. You can't play the long game a lot of times here in terms of the way you want to sort out disputes and matters. So that's a very, very interesting. And just like you, I will mimic that. I would like to see the agents, and I think I've mentioned this before, and I don't want to be repetitive, as a recognized profession internationally and also in the big jurisdictions. And for that, I just want to mention a few events coming up. You mentioned the Nordic Sports Law Conference, which I know is later this year that you will be attending. That's in Norway, and that should be interesting for anyone interested in sports law. There have been some sports law conferences. There will be one also in Saudi Arabia, the AIAF conference. I've mentioned that before. And Sport Law Conference really put the lens on regulations and agents, and great opportunity for you, Jonathan, to really articulate the agent's experience there. Also, we know that Soccer X Miami is coming in 2024 November. A lot of things happening in Miami. We just had the Copa America final there, I believe. And we mentioned FIFA moving there. So Miami becoming the go-to place for football or soccer, as I say in America. There's also the Transfer Room Summit, I believe in Madrid next month, August 2024. I actually miss the Y Scout Forum. I mentioned I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I did go to a few Y Scout forums in the past. For me, that was the go-to event.
Yeah, the Y Scout forums, they were useful. They lost a bit of momentum towards the end, and I think Y Scout recognised that. But yeah, they are a missed event on the calendar. But the Nordic Conference, that's going to be interesting. I'm very honoured to be asked to present there. FIFA also presenting on the matter of FFAR, as will a few others on agent-related matters. So there we have it. End of the show, end of the season, time for a rest. And as people may recall, it took Peter almost 2 years to convince me to do this podcast. So apart from the stress, the time, the frustrations, the challenges at times, I just wanted to say thank you to you, Peter. It has been thoroughly rewarding, despite at points both of us considering quitting, due often to matters beyond our control. And we have to thank our numerous guests from various backgrounds for their expert insights and angles on matters relating to the football agents world.
Yes, it's been a very interesting journey. I mean, we produced this directly, and I think this was a badly needed project in the agents industry. As you mentioned, it's niche, but I think the angle we came from, without sounding too blasé, we came from a very important angle that does not get told much in the football world. We know that agents have an important role to play, and we hear about them involved in certain deals, but it's a lot more to it. And I hope we're able to exemplify and summarize why that is the case. We're not arguing the case for agents. We're just providing the tapestry of this, I would say, very interesting, very challenging, but very dynamic industry. Now, above all, I'd like to thank you, all the listeners, for tuning in. It's been a steady climb in listener numbers from what is a very niche podcast. Plenty of football podcasts out there, but I think the listens now in the tens of the thousands, according to Spotify, is pretty good going for a very niche podcast. And when at a time, a lot of people are time poor and there's a huge competing space, especially in the podcast space. And so to make out time to listen to us, we really appreciate that. But hopefully, in general, it's been informative and interesting, if not useful, to many of you listeners out there. Also, please share any episodes. There's a lot of past episodes that are very good. If you go back, please share them. Or if you know someone may be interested in a different theme or a country, we've got you covered. Very, very grateful for your support. Bye from me, and good luck with the rest of the transfer window, especially in all markets that are open. Bye.
And there we go. End of the season. All on to the next season for many. So from me, until the next time, as ever, take care and bye for now.
The purpose of the Agents Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.